Hello, hires. I'm just going to do a wee video about corruption today. So we have done a few about the clergy, about the nobility, about the third estate, and then about taxation. And this one is about corruption. Now, in the updated standards for hire, corruption and taxation are put together as one factor. But again, you do need to know about both of them in case that come up as an isolated factor. But they do overlap quite considerably, and you'll learn that talking about it today. So for corruption, we're learning about the corrupt practices that was kind of in place in France. Now, to be honest, we need to make sure we're not on a high horse when talking about France, because corruption is still very much a part of many governments even today. So just remember that it's not as if it's happened in France and now we're totally immune to it. Unfortunately, corruption still happens a lot across lots of governments today, and even in places like I think of Italy all the time. But when we talked about the word nepotism, remember, and the idea of nipote and your kind of nephew or niece, whatever, that still very much happens in Italy today. Not just in politics, which is quite corrupt, but in most jobs, even in Italy today, you would usually get the job not based on how qualified you are, but who you know. Very much, are you someone belonging to someone, are you someone's relative? And that would very much get you in the job. And I understand an extent of that because it's who you know, but it's not really fair, but that still happens today. So think about that, and that's going to be a really important part of today's lesson about corruption. It's like we call it kind of nepotism, so position, who you know, you get the position, versus kind of meritocracy. And that word of meritocracy means that you merit something, so you deserve it, so you've worked hard, you've got the qualifications, you should get the job, rather than, that person, we just know that person. Now, obviously, if you're on either side of that, it can benefit you, but I think we'd all agree that probably the more fair is based on merit. But as I said, in many positions today, often it can be who the person knows, better the devil you know and all that. I'll go with the person I know rather than the person who's necessarily qualified for it. So when we're studying history and we're studying a period like this, make sure we never kind of put ourselves on a high horse. And I mean that by saying, oh yeah, that's all finished now. Remember, it's not all finished now. History is still repeating itself, but just been more aware, historically aware of things that happened in the past, but still very much happen today as well. And it makes you more critical. History is so important for that because it makes you more aware of these sort of issues that do happen, and more critical of them. So corruption, and the first page of my PowerPoint, I have 4 key terms and I asked you to define them. So the 4 key terms, in case you don't have the PowerPoint in front of you, are meritocracy is the first word I would like you to define, and I've just explained what that means a second ago. So the idea, progress based on talent, on merit, rather than on privilege, position, relatives, or wealth. I got the position because I'm rich rather than the fact that I deserve it. Then corruption, what does corruption mean? Third word is bribery. What does bribery mean? That's going to fit into our lesson today. And the fourth one is lit de justice. That's the kind of word in French that we're going to talk about. Basically, that's just a kind of what happens in France is when the king had a formal kind of session and he was allowed to override any laws that were made by the government. Obviously, he was a king. He was an absolute power. So he could at any point go, nah, I don't like that. And that comes under corruption because we can actually say, well, if the king was corrupt at times, that could actually be a sense of corruption, because if a law is passed, then the king can just veto it or can cancel it or by using royal edict to get rid of anything he wants, and that shouldn't really be fair. There should be some sort of process. And again, we still have a similar thing today. We live in a constitutional monarchy in Britain. However, our queen can no longer, I think she still does have the right to veto laws, but she doesn't do it because she knows that if she did, people wouldn't like that very much. So you'd have to be quite clever about using that veto if you had one. But back in the 18th century in France, the king would and could use it whenever he wanted, and that's why at the very introductory lesson it mentioned the English Civil War, because it was trying to get you to think about themes like power, democracy, like the idea that a king's power could be challenged. And I know a couple of you already in your analysis for nobility have already picked up the idea that although the nobility were very small in numbers, they were actually very powerful. They owned a lot of the land, and the king kind of depended on them for kind of security, protecting him. They were the ones who were well armed, etc. And if they could potentially have the army and the experience to take over him, a lot of the time they were intermarried with the royal family, so they could hold him to account. So I think that's a really important point. And in England, obviously, a century before, we had the English Civil War and we had a king being deposed and beheaded. So those things weren't brand new to France. And again, it's thinking about these themes. So kings did have to tread lightly, although they were absolute powers. They did have to be careful because history had shown us that kings had been overthrown before if they had acted tyrannically. So it's really important to remember that. However, corruption goes into talking about how we know that corruption is fraudulent and kind of dishonest activity, and that of course happened in France at the time. You know about the three estates, and you know therefore the kind of privilege and the hierarchy of wealth and privilege and how society was formed. Many were used to it, it's just what they accepted, they didn't know any different. However, we know maybe from a modern day perspective that was corrupt. A lot of it was based on wealth and privilege, and we know today that maybe isn't the best way, and that tension that system created might have then led into the revolution. It did. Spoiler alert. So why is corruption? Well, many people are annoyed, obviously, and upset by the fact that they can't better themselves, and that's a really important point. Doesn't matter what they do, they can never get out that cycle of poverty. Again, watch Les Mis. It'll break your heart, genuinely. And she just can't get out of her position. The idea, though, that back then, and I know one of Mr. Doyle's favourite books, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, he gave me it last year, 2 years ago, he gave me it for a present. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. And I read it, and it's really depressing, and it's all about a woman who can't get out of her social status, and I found it really interesting. It was a beautiful book. And I found it just moving, but again, that cycle thing, and it links back to this we're talking about here. They can't get out of the poverty, they can't actually better themselves. Now we know that in France it was actually starting to change towards the end of the century, when the third estate, some of the top third estate could actually buy their way into the nobility. So some could better themselves, but that was really high end nobility, super educated we're talking about. And again, if you were educated back then, you had to be rich. So what about everybody else, the majority who were working on the land, basically, who were agricultural, who were working in the factories, and who weren't having a say, and who weren't able to better themselves because of the way society was? So that's what we talked about there. Now, why does corruption pose a threat to the L'Enchant regime then? Well, it's based on luck, and that leads to resentment. So it's rigged in favour of those in the top two estates, and that's a self-perpetuate. It just keeps on going and going and going and going. So again, the nobility would have kids, and then their kids would become future nobility, and their kids would become the upper clergy. And even for those who wanted to give their life to God and be a priest, you know, they might even be resentful of the fact that, you know, the bishops weren't actually religious and weren't potentially actually trying to care about people's spirituality, but instead they were just rich nobles who often weren't even in where they were meant to be. Remember that idea of holding more than one position? They were just floating around having a great wee life, not actually tending to the spiritual needs of the people like they were supposed to do. So it was causing resentment, and that's really important. But remember, it doesn't stop there. Make sure you link it back to the question. Resentment was a threat because, so make sure you link it really back clearly to the question. And again, the idea, why is corruption posing a threat? Because the third estate are fed up with the fact that they're creating all the wealth, they're the base of the society, and yet they're having no representation. The unfair nature led to discontent, because the wealthy could advance up the social ladder and be whatever position they wanted to be. The world was their oyster, say, but the poorer classes at the bottom had no choice, and it was really unfair. It just depended on who you were born into, and that must have been very difficult. And the last two I've mentioned here, why corruption posed a threat, was the idea that offices were bought and sold. Again, position, it was based on money. It wasn't based on even another, like a bishopric that I mentioned there, like a bishop seat. You would think someone should be in that bishop seat who's a spiritual person and who can help develop faith, but it was often that was sold, kind of bought and sold, right? Highest bidder. This big massive bishopric in, say, Paris is a really good place, lots of money in there. If you get this position, you'll have a lot of status, you know, and they would buy and sell it. And again, some people will be thinking, is that correct? You know, that's maybe not right, and that's based on money and based on privilege and not based on merit, the fact that they deserve to get that position. And the last one is just about the king himself and the idea that his position of absolute ruler allowed him to pick and choose laws as he wanted to, and how that could be corrupt because he could be thinking about himself, obviously, and not the benefit of his people. Now, that's not just about Louis, that's about many kings before and after him. His grandfather, Louis XIV, was actually very much respected and liked, to be honest, even though he uses his leak de justice quite often. So that's what you're thinking about there in terms of corruption itself and the lesson that we've kind of given you. But remember, we had to think about further than that, moving into taxation and where they're linked. And we spoke about taxation the other day, that the taxation system itself was corrupt. And remember the idea of tax farmers and how they collected it. So you can see why they override each other quite substantially. Obviously, when you're writing your essay, and you'll be doing that sooner than you think, you will be thinking about, you could put them both into one, or you could separate them into separate factors. That's completely up to you. But why we're telling you what it is together is because the SQA have made it that way, so we just want to make sure that you know what the titles for the actual topics are. Okay, so that was my quick overview of taxation yesterday and corruption today. I hope that's helpful for you, and yeah, feel free to get in touch with any questions. Remember, I didn't mention your Analysis Plus, sorry, for your counter argument. Again, this is quite hard, the one I kind of always go back to, and I'm sure some of you will give me better ideas and better counter arguments. The one I always go back to is the fact that corruption itself isn't enough to be a substantial threat, because corruption did and still does exist in many positions of power and in many governments today, and it's not enough to bring down a system, because actually a lot of the time the system actually depends on it, a bit like Italy today. A lot of corruption going on there. I look at Putin and Russia, that's another, I mean, there's lots of examples of corruption and kind of foul play. Football, another one for you, so lots of different examples. So I would maybe argue that's not enough in itself to pose a threat, but feel free to suggest other ones, that'd be fantastic. Okay, have a good day, speak soon, bye.